Welcome to the TufFish Show. I am so excited to bring to you Stacy Fisher. Stacy, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Jen.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I would love to start with how'd you get into writing?
Um, I think that I've always been a writer. I mean, I can remember back to, I still have my very first book that I wrote when I was like 6 years old, I think. And it's, stapled together with old paper. And I don't know. I just think it's something, it's how I process, it's how I make sense of things that happen to me in my life. And it's always been, I guess, a sort of form of self care for me. I didn't call it that, obviously, until later in my life, but I think that I've just always had an inner desire and I just kept doing it and doing it.
Oh, I love that because that's how I see writing too. I write creatively, but I also use it as a form of processing. It's cathartic in its own way. So that's really cool. So, and I love that you started when you were 6, properly binding it with little staples. That's so cool. That is awesome. So, but how did the writing come through? Because I know you run a business and you're a dietitian. So how did the writing come through into your business too?
So, I mean, in different roles that I've had over the years, working in healthcare, writing is a form of, pretty much every job. But when I started my own most recent business that has more to do with self care and resilience training, um, I realized that I needed a way to connect with people that I work with. I needed a way to share my own personal experiences and kind of tell the story of how I got to where I am. And so I wrote my very first book was it was as most first books are, I smile when I look back at that. But my most recent one, Jen, was a memoir that was about something, probably the most difficult time that I've ever had in my life. And that's really what also led me to self-care, which is what I do for a living now, is work with people on creating solid self-care foundations. And that ended up being such a personal and professional little gem. I mean, to be able to put your story out into the world as a writer is terrifying in some ways because, our stories carry secrets and they carry sensitive things about us and our flaws. And at the same time, it is so therapeutic to just release it and to get it out there so that other people, and they will, and they will continue to reach out and connect with you because they will see themselves in your story and they will want to know if, how did you do what you needed to do to get to where you are, and how can they do it too. So as writers, I think we have a responsibility in many ways to kind of share that story so that we can be of service and, you know, contribute.
I love that. You have said so many nice little nuggets in there of for self-care, for the fact that you are helping somebody else to feel like they're not alone because they see themselves in your story. But also, you mentioned memoir and that this book is a memoir. So, would you talk a little bit about what it was like to work on memoir? Because the nature of that, or the nature of that, really is it's not just nonfiction, it's storytelling in it. So you kind of become a character in your own, or the people in it are characters. So it's written like fiction, but it is nonfiction. So what was that like?
It was interesting because I consider myself a nonfiction writer. I do a lot of medical and health writing, which, can be somewhat not as fun as fiction, depending on how it's done. But the memoir was really fun, a lot more fun than I expected it to be. It was awkward because I'm the person, I'm writing about my own story. So it was awkward to transition into that, but it was it was refreshing in many ways because I got a taste of what it would be like to write fiction. And so I really enjoy creative nonfiction. So I think this was a nice little blend and maybe I'll do more of it because it really was more fun than I expected it to be.
Oh, I love that. Would you like to tell the audience the name of the book?
Sure. It's called Go, One Woman, One Van, A New Beginning. And it was inspired by, I actually took a cross country trip in my Sprinter van after my marriage ended. And I was kind of like deer in headlights. What am I going to do with my life kind of thing? So I downsized the entirety of my possessions to only what would fit in that van and just kind of went on a road trip because I didn't want to make any rash decisions about what to do next and really just wanted to give myself space to grieve. And Jen, it's been amazing how many other women have reached out to me, like saying, I've thought of doing that. I want to do that. How can I do that? Because we don't allow ourselves that space to really process, grieve, and recover from those major things that happen. So while my story did maybe be extreme, just for some people, they, cannot just kind of pick up their, put everything into a van and go. I understand that. But there are different formats of going and redesigning our lives when things don't go the way we expected them to.
Now, you said something just then where giving space for grieving. And I'm a big believer in that. I think that when there's a loss of any kind, it doesn't have to be the physicality of death, but there's a loss of some kind that in between that transition, that there's a space for some kind of grief because what was is no longer. And there's the uncertainty of what will be. So it, to me, is an opportunity to also do self-care. And I know that you are a self-care, like you said, self-care resilience expert. Do you have some suggestions for that would help a writer to maybe when they're feeling uncomfortable with their writing, or maybe when they feel anxious about what that next thing is or what to do?
Yeah. So, in my view of self care, it is something that is deeply personal. It is something that you have to experiment with to know what truly is restorative for you. Um, as writers, I mean, I think writing is a form of self care, but we can also get burnt out depending on what kind of pressures are on us when we're writing. So, I always suggest that we start with a toolkit that's like a foundation piece, a grounding practice. Maybe it's your morning ritual or something that kind of gets you into your zone, whether or not you're a writer, but for writers especially, because we need to have that sacred space to kind of get ourselves in that mindset for being able to write in a way that it flows out of us, right? But if we do get to that point where we've hit a block, we're frustrated, it's not flowing, that's an indicator that we may need to do a shift and do some other form of self-care, taking a walk, meditating, maybe even scheduling some time off to recover and maybe sleep. I mean, I can't say enough about getting enough rest as writers. But yeah, it's very personal, Jen, and it's something that I define as if it has a positive impact on your well being in some way, then it probably is self care. It includes bubble baths. It doesn't have to be bubble baths. A lot of people criticize different forms of self care, but I always encourage my clients to kind of tune out the external stuff and really listen to what is helpful for you. And then toss out the stuff that isn't, that feels like work or that drains you. Just because it works for your best friend doesn't mean that it's going to work for you. So if it has a positive impact on your life, then it probably is self care. That's the easiest way to kind of do that check.
I love that. In fact, I was working with a client recently and she used the phrase life-giving activities. And I loved that. When she said that she was open and wanting more life-giving activities. I mean, just when we spoke, her eyes lit up. You could see the joy that came across her face, just even saying that. And it made my heart so happy to see that. But that's what I hear, what you're describing is that it fills you up. It fills you up your cup so that you're able to you're able to do, but you're able to give. And that is giving into your writing, into your next book or your current book, or when you're at an event, let's say you're at a book signing. And yeah, that's a lot of fun. It's a lot of activity, but make sure that you're doing things that are self-care, that are appropriate for you, so that that whole experience feels good versus you feeling drained or stressed afterwards versus feeling excited and joyful about having done that.
It's such a good point, and I have within my umbrella of things that I do at Living Up is I've created a self-care and really a lifestyle design system that helps people understand where they are in their, just in their life in general. For example, when my divorce was happening, I was in survival mode. And so I had to choose very carefully which things I had capacity for, self care wise, life wise. And I have a lot more bandwidth now. Now that it's been several years and I've grieved that loss and I've rebuilt my life, my self-care looks very different. So I think having an understanding of where you are in your season of life and choosing the appropriate forms of taking care of yourself basically is really important too.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I know you have a planner, and talk about that too. How does that fit into this, the model, if not just with self-care and resilience, but with Go? How does it all kind of fit together?
Yeah, so the planner came first. The planner I actually developed for myself during that time in my life where I realized, even though I had been a dietitian for, I don't know, 15 years by that time, I was like, there is not enough broccoli in the world to fix me at this stage of what's happening in my life. I mean, I wasn't sleeping well, my skin was a mess. I had, just your body physically responds to stress. And I
Mhm.
knew conceptually how that worked, but until that time in my life, I had no idea just how much that reality is. So
Yeah.
I kind of created this system so that I could make sure that I wasn't neglecting the key areas of my life. And I'm a very visual person. And so I had to kind of come up with a way to kind of bring myself back to, like you said, being a life. What are the life giving, being alive, I should say, because I needed life giving forms of just healing. And so that is part of the planner that I created, and the whole point of that is to help people figure out where to invest their time and energy. Most of us don't have 3 hours a day to practice self-care. We might have 5 minutes or 30 minutes. And so I love efficiency, and I needed to be able to figure out what do I need the most right now. And so that the planner serves as a compass and helps me make those decisions and then see the bigger picture of my life. Where am I headed? Where do I want to go? And how do I course correct when I'm off track?
So I love that you created a planner just in general, because I love planners. I have a paper planner sitting right over here beside me on my left, and I love it. And as much as I use my phone for other things and digital platforms to help me with pieces, there's really nothing quite just like my paper planner. So what was it like designing this planner, that when you realized this is something that can serve many, not just me?
Yeah, so it was a labor of love. I mean, the whole framework kind of, it was one of the, started at 2 o'clock in the morning, you stumble out of bed, you're sketching stuff out in your office, one of those stories. And I have a friend who is a graphic designer, and she was amazing, Brenda, and she helped me kind of sketch out and make my vision a reality.
That's
So we kind of created the very first run of the planner together. And it's exactly, I've used it, I think, now for, I guess, going on 5 years. And I'm the paper planner girl too. Like I have to see the big picture. I use my online scheduler only because I have to in this world. But I used to hop planners twice a year, sometimes three, because I kept thinking this isn't working for me anymore. And I loved the concept of bullet journals,
Mhm.
but then I would fill up the bullet journal and I would have to start over the whole design. So anyway, this is somewhere in the middle. It's got some structure, but also freedom for ideas and the bullets and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'm with you on the paper planner.
No, but I love that you created one because of the just that you've developed something that served you, but then you started to see how it could shape and help others. And it sounds like it's also gone through multiple iterations. So it sounds like it's something that as you gained more thoughts behind it or what might work or even feedback, it almost sounds like you took that in and said, what tweaks do I need to make versus just saying it's one and done and it nothing needs to change.
Yeah, that is. I mean, I got feedback from users, and of course, all of us have different planning styles. So I wanted it to be flexible so that, there's no dates in it. You have to put in your own dates. So you could start it on February 27th if you wanted to. It's not one of those that you have to buy one every quarter or you have to start it at a certain day. But yeah, it has kind of gone through a few iterations and it's been a really fun process to see something that you've created and has worked for you to be able to become a tool for other people to use as well.
I love that. So when you've worked on your book, your memoir, your planner, did you ever have like an inner editor or inner critic come up and go, what are you doing? Who do you think you are? I know you like all this stuff, but who do you think you are? And if you did, how'd you overcome it?
Well, maybe some other writers can relate to this. Absolutely is the answer to that question. And I would say this memoir was probably written over a period of about 6 years. I mean, when I had those experiences, it got shoved in a drawer and I didn't take it out for a year. Or when you write memoir, and again, you're writing about things that most of the time are focused on you, but they often involve other people. And so a lot of that was hesitation over how do I share my story without sharing someone else's story without being respectful of their privacy. And so as a memoir writer, I now see just how delicate that can be. And I'll tell you, I wrestled with that for a really long time until I finally just kind of practiced what I preach and said, what is the quickest way I can resolve this? And that was to reach out to the other people who are part of my story and to get their buy in and their support for how I told the story. And as you know, there are a lot of different ways to tell story. You don't have to share every detail of sensitive pieces of your life experiences. And there's a way to do it with grace and respect and also get the main points across so that people who read it understand on a high level what you went through. And I think looking back, I'm really glad that I think it turned out better by not elaborating a lot on details and of certain aspects of the book, and then allowing other people to kind of see themselves in the story and their experience might be slightly different, but they probably felt the way I felt or something like it. Um, so, yeah, I think memoir is very unique, but as a writer, we just have to write and then we can decide later what to take out.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness, I so love that. And being that I'm also a developmental editor, so I'm helping an author either extract that idea that's in their head or reading and helping them fill in the gaps or saying, this is too much, we don't need this, or we don't need this here. What was it like working with other people in to help bring this book together, whether it was a book designer for layout or for a cover design or an editor? What was that like? Especially being that it was such a heartfelt and personal project like memoir.
Yeah, so, editors, because we need multiple editors when we write a book, are invaluable. Like I mean, I look back at that and I think there is no way I would have been able to get this thing published without the help of someone not only just someone who was far away from my story to kind of see what, but just a very skilled editor who, the editor I worked with specialized in fiction, which was really good for me because I come from this nonfiction background. As you described, memoir does include elements of, you're telling a story and it reads like fiction, but it's really true. And I'll be honest, some of it was hard, feedback to receive because there were elements that I thought were important that maybe weren't as important to readers. And then there were other things that I thought made sense that, you know, the editor was right on every time. And I would encourage writers, like if you're new to that process, just you've got to prepare yourself to, it's sometimes it's challenging to read the feedback, but just know that it is making your finished product so much better. It really is invaluable to have a great editor to work with.
Oh, I love hearing you say that. Because to me, when I work with someone, I want there to be that connection, but I also do, like, I'll do a sample just so that they can see it. And I'm like, just because we clicked one way, I really want you to feel comfortable as you're receiving that, because I, that is so personal. And I can respect that both as a writer and as an editor. And I look at that and go, I want you to feel comfortable and know that I'm coming from a space of genuinely wanting you to be successful. This is for you, and I have your back. And I realize that it's hard. So I try to couch things gingerly, gently, but I'm direct, but I'm also trying to be, doing it in a loving and kind way, because at the end of the day, this is something very personal that that person has chosen to share, especially when you're with an editor or several editors. This book has not been released, so it's still fairly raw in some ways, and you're fairly raw as you're looking at it. So yeah, that's so cool to hear what you said about that. That's really cool.
Yeah, and I'm so glad you said that because, your editor gives fantastic feedback and it's feedback. You don't have to implement every part of that. I mean, there were a few suggestions, or I guess I would say uh, words of caution that were pointed out that I appreciated. And I felt that I wanted to keep the uh, original content so that, I wasn't being disingenuous or, but I appreciated having that second and later third set of eyes because it's non-negotiable to have an editor when you're writing a book. It really is. And yeah, I love that you guys are out there to help support us.
No, but that's a really good point, because I also look at that as, I am making suggestions, but at the end of the day, it's your name, it's your manuscript. You've got to feel good about it and own it. So I love that you've also said that. And I've had clients say, I agreed with 98%. And my first answer is, good. I'm glad you disagreed with 2%. I'm glad you disagreed with something, because it's not mine. As much as I want you to be successful, it's your book. So I love that you encourage the idea of saying it's okay to say no, because that too is a form of self-care. That's a form of you saying, no, this is an important space that I need to say. There's some things I can say yes to, and there's some I can say no, and saying no is a form of self-care too, even if I did
Yes.
hire you to do this.
Yes, absolutely. It is. It's knowing your boundaries. It is also preserving the integrity of you as who you are and also what you're creating. So yeah, it definitely is self-care is to kind of know where your boundaries lie.
Stacy, this has been such a joy and such a blast having you on this show. Thank you so much for such a refreshing and wonderful conversation. Where can our listeners connect with you, and where can they find your books?
Sure. Well, I would love to connect with your listeners. If anyone has questions about, even though I'm focused on self care, if you want to talk about books, I love to talk about books. So you can send me an email to stacy@livingupp.com, and that's got two P's in it. Livingupp.com is the website that you can learn more about self care, and you can also find my books there.
Oh, awesome. Thank you so, so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.